Hello, welcome to the First Mile of Data webinar. We're so glad you're here. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. Yes, we will record the webinar and send it to you afterwards. There will be a few interactive questions throughout. We're really excited to hear from you, so feel free to turn on your video if you'd like. And feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll try to just respond to you either in the chat or live as time allows. Okay, let's get started. There comes a time in every project when you're tasked with building a CSV importer. Why is that? So first, today we're going to go over why data onboarding is mission critical for your business, whether you call it that yet or not. And second, when it comes to onboarding CSV files, XLS, PDF, and any other human in the middle data, dev teams often overlook a lot of things. So next, we'll spend some time discussing what's often forgotten when trying to solve for this type of data. And last, we'll leave you with several ideas and options for how to plan for that data, the data that you can't plan for, really. Before we get too far into it, I'm Ashley, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing at Flatile. At Flatile, my role here is both an engineer and marketer. I lead our product-led go-to-market approach. So I have an acute focus on the first mile of the user experience. I've got a great appreciation for the idea that while customer experience evolves over the course of their interactions with your company or brand, it's often that first mile of that journey that sets the tone for growth and engagement. I'm really excited to have Eric, our Flatile co-founder, here today with us as well. Eric?
Yeah, appreciate that, Ashley, and nice to meet all of you. As Ashley mentioned, I'm one of the founders here at Flatile and excited to dive into a topic that was so interesting to me that I started a company out of all of it. So throughout my career working in all different types of both software and non-software based businesses in various industries, there was something that always just kept coming up over and over again to the point where I realized, like, hey, this is probably a pretty important problem for us to solve. And so basically today, we're going to walk you through sort of how we generally sort of think about data onboarding and why the first mile of data is just so important. And I think that the first point here is that, like, hey, like, let's state the obvious. If all of the data were in the same place, this wouldn't be an issue, right? Like, if you wind back the clock 20 years ago, maybe even further, 40 years ago, right? There were very, very few places where data needed to go. Once data landed somewhere, it just stayed there. So whether it was in, our what are they called, vacuum tube computers, or before that, written down on pieces of paper, to even before that, scratches on rocks. The data was generally fairly static, but that's not the world that we live in anymore. The world that we live in now is one that is highly data-driven. As the world has gotten more connected, we built a system of tools to manage that data and how we work with it. In fact, there's a whole entire segment of the economy, which I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with, to help manage those things. So you've all heard of Snowflake, right? Helping to figure out, like, exactly what a modern enterprise database should look like. Or Talent, one of the best known names in moving data around in mass between different internal systems. Or Tableau, to access and analyze the data that you own. Even at Flatile, we use a lot of these tools for file data storage, or for product data and file storage. We use Amazon S3. For reporting, we use BigQuery and certain Google products. And there's sort of a lot of different tools out there available to manage the data that we already own. So I guess my question for the audience, and sort of this is the first part of our interactive part of this, is just what tools are you using to manage your data? Feel free to write them down in chat. Like I mentioned, we use a lot of different tools to move data around internally, analyze it, etc. So feel free to just, if you hop into Zoom, the chat button should be at the very bottom if you hover over the window. And then you can go ahead and type in the types of tools that you're using. All right, so we've got Census. Yeah, Census is a really good one too. So Census is pretty specific to a space, right? Like a lot of times sales teams are using things like census or high touch. There's sort of called like reverse ETL. And in that specifically, like you're taking data and you're passing it down to other downstream services that you're using in your business as well. So that's a really good example. Zapier, that's another good one. Yep, that Zapier is really good for like, event-based sort of like integrations between different systems. So like, hey, we just had someone sign up for the newsletter. We want to send them a welcome email as a reply. Yeah, these are all really good. So kind of keep those in mind, right? Like we all have access to a lot of really cool tools to manage our data. But I'll kind of hand it over to Ashley here to talk a little bit more about what those tools are and also maybe some limitations that exist with them too.
Yep. So, I mean, these are really good tools, right? There's so many in here. I'm so excited everyone's participating. But remember, the data is moving around. We're not just managing data that's just moving around in our little org. We're managing data that's coming in or going out of our business as well, or even just in other internal groups. So the common theme here with all of this ideas in the chat is that when you're managing data, the data you create or already have, it's fine. There's a lot out there for this. But the reality is you're getting data from your customers, from your vendors, from your internal teams. And this is true for every business. Every business relies, on some type of data to keep them going. The data doesn't care where it came from, but they need it. So, hello world, meet data onboarding. Data exchange, and more specifically, onboarding data into your system, is the agonizing process of moving data from one business to the other. And like we said, to be fair, all of this is easy when the data is in the right shape. The data is already valid. Maybe the software is already designed for this. It's got a user-facing bulk upload. And for that, a lot of these tools mentioned, these data management tools, they'll suffice. But what do you do about the rest?
And so the systems that you're receiving the data from, right, they're not always by default interconnected. And they're almost certainly not built using the same structure. Everyone here who has, sort of this challenge of like using the data in your business oftentimes has the challenge of getting data into that business. And we're assuming here that it's the right data. You might have the next best CRM or the next most useful ERP, or you might be coming up with an entirely new type of software to manage a problem that exists in the real world that humans are solving for themselves right now. Quarterly financial results, customer data, vendor files about their prices. It's all the right data as it's coming to you. We're not saying the data is wrong. We're saying that when you don't have the data initially and you can't control the rules that define the source of that data and how the structure and the format in which it's output, then the real challenge isn't in managing the data. It's actually in the acquisition or exchange of that data that's actually holding your business back. And when this problem hasn't been solved for, you can't, if you can't onboard the data effectively, you can't really manage it either. A lot of software systems or systems just in general are empty boxes, right? Like they might be designed to do really great or awesome things with that data, but they have to get the data in that box first. And another way to think about this is that this is almost ubiquitously true regardless of the source of the data. So whether it's like a customer, vendor, another department, financial data, what I mentioned before, like you might have a simple problem like, hey, we're moving from one CRM to another, and one CRM stores dates as month and a year, and the other one stores it as a year first, right? Or it could be a source like a human. Hey, we're onboarding to our first ever CRM, and we were maintaining all of our dates in a spreadsheet. And I, as a human, naturally would write January 1st, 2022 in the sheet to say like, okay, cool, we got this customer on January 1st, 2022. However, By the way, congratulations on getting a customer on the first day of the year. That's pretty awesome. Great way to start the year off. But regardless, like the machine doesn't necessarily think about it that way. Like the CRM might think about dates in a specific date time format. In fact, there's some systems, right? The one that I used to work with that literally counted up the number of seconds that had elapsed since an arbitrary point in time. And also like differences in structure too. If you take that same example, you might have been just typing in the names of your contacts in your spreadsheet. The source system might have stored those as whole names, but the new system requires them in discrete first and last names. The whole point here is that when the data isn't structured or formatted correctly, regardless of how right that data is, it can take minutes for individual changes, but those add up to thousands of hours to complete a data exchange between two different systems. And so this is a business critical problem we've established, right? Like, hey, to manage the data, we need to onboard it. And to onboard it, we need to make sure it's in the right format, it's in the right structure. So we have to solve it. What do we do? Well, there's actually solutions out there. They're what I like to refer to as sweat-based solutions. So these sweat-based solutions are ones that I can almost guarantee that if you have some sort of system where you need to onboard data from, you're using one of these. You're using, services. Services is basically saying, hey, we're going to throw people at this problem. We're going to have a bunch of people whose job it is, whether full-time or part-time, to go get a bunch of incoming data. Again, we know it's the right data, but their job is to make sure that it conforms to all of the rules of the system that we're pulling it into. Now, this was actually my full-time job for a long time. I was working with enterprise electronic medical record implementations. And one of the most challenging things that we needed to do was to make sure that all of the appropriate patient and financial and claims data was moving from whatever legacy system that our customer was using, oftentimes multiple legacy systems, into one. And so we basically were doing the same type of work for every single customer, right? There was still patient data, there was still claims data, there was still transaction or financial data. But every single time, because the source of the data had a different way of interpreting or using or storing it, we as a team were going in and we were writing scripts. We were pulling up different versions of spreadsheet templates. I think the statute of limitations is probably passed, so I can say this. On occasion, we had to have local copies of sensitive data on our machines in order to actually make the process work. So implementation services, not only is it sort of like costly and poorly scalable, but again, that can also result in data quality issues, right? Like I'm just a human. I could have messed up on how I wrote, my VLOOKUP in my Excel sheet, or how I decided to, loop through a particular, script. And so in those cases, right, like there might be, opportunities there to improve upon what those humans are able to do and what they already know. Spreadsheet templates is another example of this. It's not too different from services, but instead of saying, hey, we're going to take on the work of onboarding this data, you're instead putting the work on whoever provides the data to you. So the most common case for this is a spreadsheet template that someone downloads to then load data into software they're using. I took this approach when I was leading product at Onboarding. Our end customers were receptionists and office managers who were trying to stand up an office management software system, mostly for visitor management in their office. And one of the first things that they needed to do to see any value out of Envoy was to load up a list of all of their employees and all of their employees' contact information, so that way they could see that those employees got notified when a visitor arrived or when they got a delivery to the office. And the challenge with doing that is that we're then making those receptionists and making those office managers have to understand what Envoy's system does and how it interprets data. You're asking those folks to encode a CSV file in UTF-8 format in a very specific structure in a 3-page long support article, and that wasn't exactly a good customer experience. that led to reduced conversion. That led to a lot of people chatting in, getting frustrated with this, because again, what is the best, best place an office manager can be focused? It's on managing the office, not trying to figure out sort of like how the Envoy system understands data. And then the third sort of like Sweatbased solution that we often see is a custom build. So you might say, well, it's painful to do these implementation services internally. It's painful to our customers to do spreadsheet templates. Let's go build our own product. And when you're building your own product, that can work really well to solve for this. But it also can be a major, major distraction from what it is that you're doing as a business. For example, when I was working at a company called Crimson Hexagon, one of the things we needed to do was be able to pull in data from various social media sources in order to effectively load that into our platform and run analysis on that data that we shared with large brands and the other customers that we were working with. And constantly, we found ourselves spending far more time trying to debug all of the products and tools that we built to ingest this data than we did actually spending time with the customer, consulting them on how best to orient their social media strategy. So when you have a custom build, it's not only the maintenance cost of that software that you then have to maintain yourself, it's also the fact that you're making a trade-off and taking away from the core experience that you're designing and your core objective as a business, and instead focusing on something that I can tell you firsthand that takes an entire company of people dedicated and focused on to solve. So I want to kind of stamp this with a guarantee. I said earlier that I believe that every one of you, if you have a software system, you have one of these Sweatbased solutions in place. If you can write me a detailed story about how you have sweated through one of these solutions, feel free to shoot me an email. My email address is down at the bottom of the slide here, and include your Venmo handle, and I will send you $20. Again, I'm just asking for a story here, like send me a detailed story via email of how you sweated through one of these solutions, and I will send you $20. So that's my email address, and Ashley will remind you at the end too, because I'm sure we got a little bet going to see how many $20 bills I'm going to have to hand out here. So anyways, let's talk about like what is often sort of overlooked in these solutions. I'm digging down into each of them. So the first one here is for the folks building it themselves. So if you're trying to build a solution for data onboarding yourself, you're not building one system. You're actually having to build 3 different systems, because the first thing you have to solve for is scalable data transfer. Right, that's going to be something like, okay, cool, we have this ETL solution that we can put into place. ETL is really good for scalable data transfer. But as we talked about earlier, the limitation of ETL is the fact that ETL relies on knowing the source and controlling the source of the data. In addition, like that ETL system has to accommodate for different types of flows of data that might come in. Oftentimes when you're onboarding data, you're dealing with not just, like a stream of data events, but rather bulk transfers and bulk uploads. And so oftentimes, like a lot of the tooling and system that we built even internally at Flatile rely on ETL technology behind the scenes, but it's not sufficient as far as a software-based solution goes. And so the next part of this is for accessible automation. Right, so like we need to be able to scale this thing, but we also need to be accessibly automate commonly repeated tasks. Otherwise, it's no better than using a spreadsheet template. So within RPA is a very common tool RPA is a very common tool that you might use for something like this. And again, the RPA is designed for automating a task based on human input, and then after a certain confidence threshold, being able to just do that automatically for that human. And there's a lot of companies out there that have really great RPA platforms that are designed to do exactly this. But in the context of data onboarding, again, that's only a single component of the solution. And then finally, there's data prep. Like let's not forget that the data is not in the right format. But let's not forget that it's not in the right structure. And so data prep tools also exist out there. I'm not sure if I remember this in any of the examples, but I'm sure some of you are using tools like Alteryx. We touched on Tableau a little bit earlier about ways to sort of like prep or transform the data appropriately. And those tools are also really great, but again, are best for managed data. And they're also designed for experts to be involved with them too. If you're, building a business that serves a customer base like we were at Envoy, that's not necessarily technical experts, it's probably going to be a losing battle to try and get those receptionists to understand how best they should use a concatenate or trim function inside of Excel macros or in a SQL query. Right. So those tools are really good for those experts, but for the non-experts, they're really just not accessible at all. And so you have to have like all three of those components, like the ability to scalably transfer data, make it accessible and automate where you can, and also be able to transform, modify, and map the data appropriately. And so if you say like, oh man, that sounds like a lot of work, let's fall back to spreadsheet templates. There's another issue with spreadsheet templates too, and that just has to come with the experience. Writing instructions and translating internal keys in your database into human readable headers, and then making sure that the script you write to ingest that specific format of spreadsheet template is exactly right. That also kind of ignores the fact that we're humans. And when there's a human in the loop, someone could have the wrong version of Excel. They could not save the macros that were in the template appropriately or save it as the wrong file type. They could have typed in their own headers. They could have done practically anything. And you're going to end up with a broken process, but then again, you're going to have to fall back to services. And what's often overlooked about the services alternative is humans don't like being robots. Maybe with the exception of Jeff Bezos, I'll call that out. Repeatable tasks are things that are best solved by machines. And I know that my favorite part of my job when I was working with Epic doing those enterprise EMR implementations was definitely not the times where I had to go and figure out why and how I could get data into one specific format in a specific structure, and then do that over and over again, day in and day out for every single one of the customers that I was working with.
So as you can see with Sweatbased solutions, this effort required has a sizable impact to your business and really just introduces another set of problems. They're poorly scalable. It can create a bad customer experience, and they can become pretty expensive to maintain. But really the cherry on top is there's an opportunity cost here. You're focused on getting data instead of whatever your business is supposed to be doing. You're spending all of your time thinking about getting data into your CRM instead of making your sales team more effective. For instance, in enterprise supply chain, you're trying to get markets to product effectively. You're not trying to wrangle all of your vendors' data sets. Or healthcare, you're managing health claims in an enterprise software platform. Your goal is to help your hospital system collect from insurance companies, not necessarily fighting with the insurance companies on how they need to receive the data. So that brings us to another question for you. All that being said, what sort of processes or tools have you built in your business to solve this challenge of data onboarding? Don't worry, Eric will still send you $20 if you participate in the chat, but I'm super interested to hear.
And just to get things started too, I think I saw, Reddy already post an example of this too. So like the custom built bulk upload system for product data on an Excel sheet. Could you tell me a little bit about like why you chose to go the route of having what looks like a spreadsheet template for that solution? And Bradley, I also see that note that you shared in here too. Sweat-based solution, right? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean that you have a team of people or folks that are working part-time and helping your customers through that? All right, I see Google Sheets. Yeah, that's another good one too.
Jamie says CSV template here as well, which is not always respected by our customers. Precisely. Okay. Logan says their ETL tool accepts one-off files. Bo says CSV templates that we offer for our onboarding teams and for our customers for related data synchronization. Azure Logic apps.
Yeah, Bo, that's actually really interesting. The CSV templates that you give to like internal teams is kind of a blend of those different solutions. And so like that's an example of where like, hey, like you can't even use one of those sweat-based solutions because you just have to combine multiple of them together. Yeah, and I think another challenge, Reddy, you just called that out in your answer here too, is that like, it can be challenging to figure out how to, do things like relating data sets together as well, right? You can't expect your customer to know how you're going to be storing URLs internally on your machine or in your system in order to reference images of products. So that could definitely be a really big challenge here too. And that would, beget saying, hey, okay, cool, we're going to have to handle this all internally or in-house. All right. I love all these examples. Thanks for sharing them. And again, feel free to email me with them as well. I would love to hear more about that. So let's go ahead and hop in here and move along a little bit further, talking about the last section of our sort of webinar presentation today. Is really talk about sort of like the different ways in which we might see, like effective data onboarding flows implemented out in the wild. So the first one here is just the idea of like a simple embedded import of individual sets of data. Again, this is something that's designed in order to be able to, like basically let the customer serve themselves, but without requiring them to go and understand all of the intricate details of your system. So a good way to think about this is like, hey, can we give someone an intelligent import model that's not going to require them to learn everything about our system, and we know that they're just coming with the right data set? So in this type of flow, again, we're leaning into the things that are good about being able to provide a spreadsheet template to someone without having to provide that spreadsheet template to someone. And again, what can go wrong, we talked about before when you try to build this yourself, is like, basically when you're trying to build this, there's a lot of different sort of ways that the data can come in uniquely, depending on who the customer is or where they're coming from, right? When you have this self-serve model, you need to have controls in place to allow for someone to bring, again, the right data, but it might just be in the wrong structure format. So for example, if it's a list of employee data, right? Like you might have, a social security number is sort of a core identifier for that employee, but that might be stored as a different value in your system versus, the system where it was coming from. And so it's just labeled differently. So that solution, that self-serve solution, has to accommodate for the fact that the two different data sets, the incoming and the target, have different labels on what the fields are that are getting imported. Or there could be different types of relationships, right? Like they could have certain ways of, self-referencing that list of employees to identify who their managers are. And then also we went through this in a little bit more detail before, but things like date formatting. So like if they were formatting dates in a certain way, or they called time of service called time of service something different than before, like or something than you do, then basically like that could be a challenge unless the system can accommodate for that type of workflow where the customer is either informed or the system just knows already how to take that incoming data and plug it into the target format. Another workflow we commonly see is something like file feeds. So this would be for importing data, oftentimes from legacy systems or in some sort of batch job. If you have an SFTP server that you're using today, or if you're hearing things like batch job and you're like, oh yeah, that's exactly what we do. This is sort of the workflow that you're trying to follow, right? You're saying, hey, we need to get these feeds of data in, but those feeds of data are still files. Like let's take a basic example here of enrollment information. So let's just say you have a health benefits plan and there's a health benefits plan provider that needs to manage all of the enrollment data. And you're, basically dropping a file on a regular basis into an SFTP bucket and sending it to that benefits provider. Like that data still has the same problems in terms of structuring and formatting that you might run into with any sort of other source of data as well. So like in enrollment data, it might be a LIMRA XML specific format. And that LIMRA XML specific format needs to be parsed according to the LIMRA spec, so that way we can then appropriately map that to the data in the benefit provider system. And then also in that type of flow, like you probably want to trigger when something goes wrong, right? So like, hey, if we weren't able to, map something from this incoming file because it diverged from the LIMRA spec, can we make sure that there is a human who has the best knowledge of what that data means in a position to solve that particular problem? So the place where we commonly see this again is like, hey, if we have like an SFTP file feed or something like an API that gets triggered periodically to pull a bulk set of data in order to push it into another system. That's, again, another type of data onboarding that you might need to accommodate for. One that we're probably all familiar with is onboarding projects. So, hey, we've got a new customer, really excited new customer, so excited for you to get your hands on our software. And by the way, here's the task list of all the things we're going to need to do together to get your data ready for us to go. So kind of playing more into that example I was sharing before, an example you could think about is in like the payroll space. Let's just say you're onboarding to a new sort of benefits platform, whether it's Gusto, Workday, whatever, right? Here, you're thinking about like, okay, cool, we have to get all of their data into our system. We have to do this at scale. And at the same time, we have to train them on how the system is going to work and how the system is going to function. And so in this process, like you're almost treating this like a whole project in itself, let alone within the broader customer onboarding. The fact that like we need to make sure that we're able to capture what the actual incoming data means and how that should be effectively, brought into our target system so we can take advantage of that data in the target system. Another example of this here would be something like Headless data exchange. So this is very similar to like the file feed type use case where it's like, hey, you know what? Like we actually have a very specific niche or industry vertical or something like that where it begets us having all of our own sort of like user experience because it's specific to what our customers do or what our vendors do or whatever it might be. But in those cases as well, that doesn't mean that you have to necessarily build all of the backend tools and systems for being able to map data, to transform it, and to validate it. You could just, put in place a headless solution, right? Say like, hey, you know what? We're going to bring our own UI to the table. We're going to bring our own product and interactions to the table, but we still want to take advantage of, scalable sending of data. We want to take advantage of intelligent mapping. We want to take advantage of, human in the loop style transformation messages that make it very easy for a non-data expert to resolve data issues. And finally, we see this in a hybrid workflow. So combining a lot of these other elements together. A great example of this would be like, oh man, you know what? Most of my customers have the data in the right structure and format most of the time. So what I'd love to do is make it really easy for them just to give me the data. Just make it so they give me the data. And if there's something wrong with it, we'll take care of it ourselves, but we'll treat it as an exception case. And so in those types of examples, what you could see is like, hey, you know what? We're going to use sort of part of one flow, which is that embedded import solution. But maybe after we ask the end customer to go in and map the data, or maybe not even that, maybe they just need to upload the file. Like, we're just going to use the automation in our system to verify that it's all correct. And if so, we'll load it in and we're good to go. And then we also have a fallback, which is if it's not all correct, we can have someone internally get notified and review that data before it goes in, or choose to notify the customer and say, hey, customer, here's a link to a place where you can go and resolve these issues that we see here too. So that's just a high-level overview of some of the different data onboarding flows that we most commonly see. And I will hand it back to Ashley to wrap this up here.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. So to recap, building these solutions to solve data onboarding challenges is a complicated path and honestly often not leading to success for various reasons. And so just to recap what we went over today is you can't take advantage of the data you have without getting it clean in the first place. And the status quo is more expensive to your business than you may realize. And there are, you can have a plan for the data that you can't plan for. So this is literally what I woke up and thought about, what I thought about before this call, and what I will think about after this call. This is all we do here at Flatile. If you want to figure out how to onboard data better, give us a call. I really appreciate your active participation today in our discussion. And if you'd like to continue this conversation, Eric showed his email earlier. I'd also love to hear from you. So eric@ashley@flatile.com, where you can follow this link here to learn more. Thank you so much.